Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will fundamentally change how you see the world and everyone in it. Thomas Hobbes understood something that most people spend their entire lives refusing to accept. Human beings are not naturally good, noble, or cooperative creatures. We are, at our core, selfish, fearful, and driven by an insatiable hunger for power and security. Strip away the veneer of civilization, and what you find underneath is a creature that would tear apart its neighbor for the slightest advantage. This isn't cynicism, this is reality. And once you truly understand this reality, you hold a weapon more devastating than any physical force, the power to make others destroy themselves. Most people live in a fantasy. They believe that if they're kind enough, fair enough, honest enough, the world will reward them. These people are lambs walking into a slaughterhouse, so busy congratulating themselves on their moral superiority that they never see the knife coming. But you're different. You're listening because somewhere deep inside, you know that the game is rigged, and you want to learn how to play it properly. Hobbes called it the state of nature, the war of all against all. Even in our supposedly civilized society, that war continues. It's just fought with different weapons now. Instead of clubs and spears, we use words, reputations, social networks, and psychological pressure. The battlefield has shifted from the wilderness to the office, the social circle, the family dinner table. But make no mistake, it's still a battlefield. And in this war, the greatest weapon isn't aggression, it's understanding. When you truly understand what drives people, what they fear, what they need, what they're desperate to hide, you don't need to attack them. You simply create the conditions where they attack themselves. The first thing you must understand is that every person you meet is governed by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being exposed, fear of losing what they have, fear of not getting what they want. This fear is their weakness, and weakness is opportunity. But here's where most people get it wrong. They think they need to exploit that fear directly, to threaten or intimidate. That's amateur hour. That's what small minds do. True power comes from understanding that people will work harder to avoid loss than to achieve gain, and they will destroy themselves trying to protect an image that was never real in the first place. Consider the person who has spent years building a reputation as the moral center of their community. They've positioned themselves as the ethical leader, the one everyone looks up to, the voice of righteousness. This person has created their own prison. Every decision they make must conform to this image they've constructed. They can't be human, can't make mistakes, can't show weakness, because their entire identity depends on maintaining this impossible standard. You don't need to tear down this person. You simply need to put them in situations where maintaining their image becomes increasingly difficult. Present them with moral dilemmas where every choice compromises their position. Watch as they twist themselves into knots trying to be consistent with an identity that was always a performance. Eventually, they'll collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. This is the genius of Hobbes's insight. People are their own worst enemies. They create elaborate structures of self-deception, and then they exhaust themselves trying to maintain those structures. Your job isn't to attack these structures. It's to apply gentle pressure at exactly the right points until the whole thing comes crashing down. The beautiful part is that they'll blame themselves for the collapse. They'll never realize that someone else was orchestrating their downfall. But this power comes with a price. Once you see people this clearly, once you understand the mechanisms that drive them, you can never unsee it. You'll watch your friends, your family, your colleagues, and you'll see the puppets dancing on their strings. You'll see the fear in their eyes, the desperate need for validation, the pathetic scrambling for security and status. It's lonely up here, in the realm of clear sight. Most people can't handle this level of awareness because the truth is too stark, too brutal, too unforgiving. This is why Nietzsche spoke of the abyss gazing back into you. When you study human nature deeply enough to manipulate it effectively, you're forced to confront the same nature within yourself. You realize that you too are driven by fear and need and the desperate hunger for power. The difference is that you're honest about it. You don't pretend to be something you're not. You don't construct elaborate moral facades to hide behind. You accept what you are and you use it. The second principle you must master is patience. Destruction through self-sabotage is not a quick process. It requires the long view, the willingness to plant seeds that won't bear fruit for months or even years. Think of yourself as a gardener cultivating a very specific kind of crop, human weakness. You provide the right conditions, the right nutrients, the right amount of pressure, and then you wait. You watch. You make small adjustments. And eventually, your target does all the heavy lifting for you. Take the ambitious colleague who's always maneuvering for the next promotion. This person's hunger for advancement is their weakness. You don't need to sabotage their projects or spread rumors about their competence. Instead, you help them. You encourage their ambition. You feed their ego. You make sure they take on more responsibility than they can handle. You support their boldest, most overreaching initiatives. You watch as they volunteer for impossible deadlines and unrealistic targets. And when they inevitably fail, because you've helped them set themselves up for failure, you're there to offer sympathy and support. You become the trusted confidant who understands their disappointment. Meanwhile, their reputation crumbles under the weight of their own overreach. This is the art that Machiavelli understood. True power operates behind the scenes. The most effective rulers, the most successful manipulators, are often invisible. They don't need to be seen winning because they've arranged things so that winning is inevitable. They create conditions where their enemies defeat themselves, where their competitors self-destruct, where the obstacles to their success simply melt away without any apparent intervention. But here's what separates the masterful from the merely cunning: restraint, the urge to reveal your hand, to take credit for your manipulation, to gloat over your victories. This urge will destroy you faster than any enemy. The moment you're identified as the architect of someone's downfall, you become a target. The moment people realize that you're pulling strings, they start looking for your strings. True power requires invisibility. It requires the discipline to watch others take credit for your work, to remain in shadows while your plans unfold in the light. This invisibility serves another purpose. It protects you from the psychological toll of your actions. When you destroy someone, and they never know it was you, when they blame circumstances or bad luck or their own failures, you're insulated from their pain. You don't have to see the hurt in their eyes or carry the weight of their hatred. You can maintain the comfortable fiction that you're not really hurting anyone. They're hurting themselves. This distance is necessary because despite what you might tell yourself, you're still human. You still have empathy, still feel guilt, still struggle with the moral implications of your actions. The invisibility allows you to function despite these inconvenient emotions. Now you might be wondering about the ethics of all this. You might be thinking that what I'm describing is cruel, manipulative, destructive to the social fabric that holds us together. And you're right. It is all of those things. But here's the truth that philosophers and moralists don't want you to understand. The social fabric is already torn. The game is already being played. The choice isn't between a world of manipulation and a world of honesty. It's between being the manipulator or being the manipulated. You can choose to be the predator or the prey, but you cannot choose to opt out of the ecosystem entirely. Every day, people are using these techniques against you. Your boss who gives you just enough praise to keep you motivated but never enough to make you comfortable. Your friend who always has a crisis that needs your attention but is mysteriously unavailable when you need support. Your romantic partner who uses affection as a tool to get what they want and withholds it as punishment when you don't comply. The difference is that they're probably not conscious of what they're doing. They've learned these patterns through trial and error, through instinct and social conditioning. You have the opportunity to be intentional about it, to understand the mechanisms you're using, to be strategic rather than merely reactive. This brings us to the third principle: emotional detachment. You cannot manipulate others effectively if you're emotionally invested in their approval or disapproval. You cannot orchestrate someone's downfall if you need them to like you. This is perhaps the hardest lesson to learn because humans are social creatures. We're wired to seek acceptance, to fear rejection, to desperately want to belong. But these needs make us vulnerable. They create pressure points that others can exploit. They force us to compromise our objectives in service of maintaining relationships that may not serve our interests. Emotional detachment doesn't mean becoming a sociopath. It means understanding that your emotional needs and your strategic objectives are separate things, and that you must be willing to sacrifice the former in service of the latter when necessary. It means recognizing that the person you're destroying today might be someone you've shared laughs with, someone who's helped you in the past, someone who thinks of you as a friend. It means accepting that these facts don't change what needs to be done. This is where most people fail. They get halfway through the process and then their conscience kicks in. They start rationalizing reasons to stop, to show mercy, to find a different way. They convince themselves that they can achieve their objectives without causing pain, that there's a kinder, gentler path to victory. This sentimentality will destroy you faster than any enemy. Your targets don't have the luxury of your mercy. If the positions were reversed, they would show you no quarter. The world doesn't reward softness or hesitation. It rewards results. The fourth principle is understanding leverage. Every person has something they can't afford to lose: their reputation, their relationships, their secrets, their security, their sense of themselves. Your job is to identify what that thing is, and then create circumstances where maintaining it becomes impossible. But here's the sophisticated part. You don't threaten to take it away. Threats are crude. Threats create enemies. Instead, you create situations where they must choose between keeping what they value and achieving what they want. You force them to make impossible choices, and then you watch as they choose poorly. Consider the person who prides themselves on their loyalty to their friends. This loyalty is their defining characteristic, the thing that makes them feel superior to others. You don't attack this loyalty directly. Instead, you create situations where their loyalty conflicts with their self-interest. You introduce them to opportunities that require them to choose between helping a friend and advancing themselves. You arrange circumstances where being loyal means being foolish, where standing by their principles means losing everything they've worked for. And then you watch as they compromise those principles, one small decision at a time, until they wake up one day and realize they've become everything they once despised. The beauty of this approach is that it's completely deniable. You're not making them choose between loyalty and self-interest. Circumstances are. You're not forcing them to compromise their values. Life is. You're simply the invisible hand that arranged for life to present them with these choices at exactly the moment when they were most vulnerable to making them. This is why Hobbes understood that the state of nature never really ends. We've created institutions and social contracts to manage our natural impulses, but those impulses remain. The fear, the greed, the hunger for power, the willingness to sacrifice others for our own benefit. These drives don't disappear just because we've agreed to play by certain rules. They simply find more sophisticated expressions. The person who would club you to death for your food in a state of nature is the same person who will destroy your career for a promotion in civilized society. The weapons have changed, but the war continues, and this is where your advantage lies. Most people want to believe that they've evolved beyond these primitive impulses. They want to think that they're better than their ancestors, more civilized, more moral, more enlightened. This self-deception makes them predictable. It makes them vulnerable, because when push comes to shove, when they're forced to choose between their principles and their survival, they'll choose survival every time, but they'll hate themselves for it. And that self-hatred will make them even more vulnerable to manipulation. You see, the person who destroys themselves is always more devastated than the person who's destroyed by an external force. When someone attacks you from the outside, you can maintain your sense of righteousness. You can tell yourself that you're the victim, that you're morally superior to your attacker, that you would never sink to their level. But when you destroy yourself through your own choices, your own weaknesses, your own failures, there's nowhere to hide. You can't blame anyone else. You can't maintain the fiction that you're a good person who's been wronged. You have to confront the truth about who you really are. This self-knowledge is devastating because most people's self-image is built on lies. They tell themselves they're brave when they're cowards, honest when they're deceptive, loyal when they're self-serving, principled when they're opportunistic. When circumstances force them to act according to their true nature rather than their idealized self-image, the cognitive dissonance is unbearable. They either have to radically revise their understanding of themselves, or they have to create elaborate justifications for their behavior. Either way, they're damaged. Either way, they're weakened. Either way, they're exactly where you want them. The fifth principle is timing. Destruction, like creation, requires the right moment. You can have perfect understanding of your target's weaknesses, flawless technique in applying pressure, and complete emotional detachment. But if your timing is wrong, your efforts will fail. People are most vulnerable when they're transitioning between states, when they're changing jobs, ending relationships, moving to new cities, dealing with loss, celebrating success. These transition periods disrupt their normal patterns of thought and behavior. They create windows of opportunity where even strong people become temporarily weak, where even smart people make stupid decisions. Your job is to identify these windows and be ready to act when they open. This requires patience and observation. You need to understand the rhythms of your target's life, the cycles of their confidence and insecurity, the patterns of their decision-making. You need to know when they're likely to be distracted, overwhelmed, or emotionally vulnerable, and then you need to be prepared to strike at exactly the right moment. But striking doesn't mean attacking. It means providing the right stimulus at the right time to trigger the self-destructive behavior that's already latent within them. It means being the catalyst that accelerates reactions that would have happened anyway, just more slowly and with less devastating results. You're not creating their weaknesses. You're simply exploiting the ones that already exist. This is crucial to understand because it helps you maintain the psychological distance necessary to function. You're not destroying innocent people. You're revealing the truth about people who were already compromised. You're not creating evil. You're exposing evil that was already there, hidden beneath layers of social conditioning and self-deception. This perspective allows you to see your actions as a form of honesty, a way of stripping away illusions and revealing reality. And reality is this: most people are weak, scared, selfish creatures who will betray their deepest principles when the pressure gets high enough. They'll sacrifice their friends for their ambitions, compromise their values for their comfort, abandon their loyalties for their security. They'll do these things and then spend years constructing elaborate justifications for why they had no choice, why circumstances forced their hand, why anyone in their position would have done the same thing. Your power comes from understanding this truth while others remain in denial about it. Your advantage comes from accepting what you are while others pretend to be something they're not. Your strength comes from operating in reality while others live in fantasy. This clarity of vision is your greatest weapon because it allows you to see opportunities that others miss, to recognize weaknesses that others ignore, to predict behavior that others find surprising. But with this clarity comes responsibility. Once you understand how to destroy people without ever attacking them, you also understand how to protect yourself from the same techniques. You recognize the signs of manipulation. You see the subtle pressures being applied to make you act against your own interests. You understand when someone is trying to force you into impossible choices or compromise your principles. This knowledge is your shield as much as it is your sword. The sophisticated manipulator always has defenses as strong as their offenses. They never leave themselves vulnerable to the same techniques they use against others. They maintain multiple identities, multiple sources of security, multiple exit strategies. They never become so invested in any single thing that its loss would destroy them. They cultivate emotional detachment not just as a tool for manipulating others, but as protection against being manipulated themselves. This is the loneliness I mentioned earlier. When you understand these mechanisms, when you see how easily people can be controlled and predicted, you realize how alone you really are. You can't fully trust anyone because you know how little trust is worth. You can't completely relax your guard because you know how quickly things can change. You can't invest yourself completely in any relationship because you know how easily relationships can be weaponized. You live in a state of permanent strategic thinking, always calculating, always planning, always preparing for the next move in a game that never ends. But this loneliness is also freedom. You're not bound by the same emotional needs that control others. You're not dependent on external validation or approval. You don't need others to like you, or respect you, or understand you. You don't need to maintain an image or live up to expectations or conform to social norms that don't serve your interests. You can be exactly who you are, pursue exactly what you want, and make decisions based on logic rather than emotion. This freedom is terrifying to most people. They would rather be controlled by their needs and fears than face the responsibility of true autonomy. They would rather live in comfortable illusions than confront uncomfortable truths. They would rather be victims of circumstances than architects of their own destiny. This preference for comfortable slavery over dangerous freedom is another weakness you can exploit. The sixth principle is plausible deniability. Everything you do must appear natural, coincidental, or inevitable. You must never be seen as the cause of someone's downfall. This requires careful planning and perfect execution. It means leaving no fingerprints, creating no patterns that can be traced back to you, maintaining the appearance of innocence even as you orchestrate destruction. This is both an art and a science. It requires understanding psychology well enough to predict how people will react to specific stimuli. It requires understanding social dynamics well enough to manipulate group behavior. It requires understanding your targets well enough to know exactly which buttons to push and how hard to push them. And it requires enough self-control to resist the temptation to take credit for your work. The moment you start bragging about your successes, the moment you start taking credit for your manipulations, the moment you start thinking of yourself as untouchable, you've made yourself vulnerable. Pride is the weakness that destroys even the most skilled manipulators. It makes them sloppy, overconfident, careless. It makes them believe their own propaganda about their superiority, and that belief makes them blind to the fact that someone else might be playing the same game against them. Remember, in a world where everyone is manipulating everyone else, the person who thinks they're immune to manipulation is the most vulnerable of all. The person who believes they're too smart to be fooled is the easiest to fool. The person who thinks they're beyond these games is already losing them. Your understanding of these principles must include understanding how they can be used against you. Your mastery of these techniques must include developing immunity to them. This brings us to the seventh and final principle, evolutionary thinking. You must constantly adapt, constantly evolve, constantly refine your methods. The techniques that work today may not work tomorrow. The weaknesses you can exploit now may be strengths your targets develop later. The social dynamics that allow your manipulations to succeed are always changing. You must change with them or become obsolete. This means staying informed about human psychology, about social trends, about technological changes that alter how people interact and communicate. It means studying your failures as carefully as your successes to understand what went wrong and how to do better next time. It means being willing to abandon methods that no longer serve you, even if they've been successful in the past. Most importantly, it means understanding that the game itself is evolving. As more people become aware of these techniques, as psychological literacy increases, as manipulation becomes more widely understood, the old methods become less effective. What worked for Machiavelli in the 16th century needed updating for the 20th century, and what worked in the 20th century needs updating for the 21st. But the fundamental truth remains constant. Human nature doesn't change. People are still driven by fear and greed and the hunger for power. They still deceive themselves about their motives and capabilities. They still prioritize short-term gains over long-term consequences. They still make emotional decisions and then rationalize them with logic. These eternal weaknesses ensure that there will always be opportunities for those who understand how to exploit them. So where does this leave you? You now understand the rules of a game that most people don't even know they're playing. You see the mechanisms that drive human behavior while others remain blind to them. You have weapons that others don't recognize as weapons. You have the power to shape outcomes without appearing to exert any influence at all. What you do with this power is up to you. You can use it to advance your career, to eliminate competition, to gain advantage in personal relationships, to protect yourself from manipulation by others. You can use it sparingly, only when necessary, or you can make it your primary mode of operation. You can focus on defensive applications or go on the offensive. You can target specific individuals who threaten your interests or create broader changes in your social environment. But whatever you choose to do, remember this: power without purpose is meaningless. Destruction without construction is nihilism. The ability to tear down must be balanced by the ability to build up. Otherwise, you become merely an agent of chaos, creating damage without creating value. The most successful manipulators are those who use their understanding of human nature not just to destroy their enemies, but to build something lasting for themselves. Think of yourself as an architect of social reality. You're not just tearing down the structures that others have built around themselves. You're building new structures that serve your purposes. You're not just exposing the weaknesses in others. You're creating strengths in yourself. You're not just winning individual battles. You're positioning yourself to win the larger war. This perspective transforms manipulation from a purely destructive force into a creative one. It allows you to see yourself not as a predator feeding on the weakness of others, but as a realist operating according to the true rules of human interaction. It enables you to maintain some sense of purpose and meaning, even as you engage in activities that others would consider immoral or evil, because that's what this ultimately comes down to: the question of morality. You will be tempted to judge yourself by conventional moral standards, to feel guilt or shame about your actions, to question whether the power you're wielding is worth the price you're paying for it. These feelings are natural and probably healthy to some degree. They indicate that you haven't completely lost your humanity in the pursuit of power. But you must not let these feelings paralyze you or prevent you from doing what needs to be done. The world is not a moral place. It's a place where power determines outcomes, where the strong survive and the weak are consumed, where good intentions without effective action are worthless. You can choose to accept this reality and operate within it effectively, or you can maintain your moral purity and accept the consequences of powerlessness. Most people choose a middle path. They compromise their morals just enough to get by, but not enough to truly succeed. They engage in small betrayals and minor manipulations while telling themselves they're still good people. They benefit from systems of power and exploitation while maintaining plausible deniability about their participation. This halfway position is the worst of both worlds. They get the guilt without the power, the corruption without the benefit. If you're going to play this game, play it completely. If you're going to compromise your ideals for practical advantage, make sure the advantage is significant enough to justify the compromise. Don't engage in petty manipulations for trivial gains. Don't risk your reputation for minor victories. Don't sacrifice your integrity for anything less than substantial power or security. And always remember that this power is a tool, not an identity. You are not defined by your ability to manipulate others any more than a surgeon is defined by their ability to cut into human flesh. The skill is separate from the person wielding it. You can use these techniques when necessary while maintaining other aspects of your personality and values. You can be ruthless in your professional life while being loving in your personal relationships. You can be manipulative toward your enemies while being honest with your allies. The key is compartmentalization, keeping these different aspects of yourself separate and not letting the darkness in one area contaminate the light in others. This requires constant vigilance and strong psychological boundaries. It requires understanding when to turn these skills on and when to turn them off. It requires knowing who deserves your honesty and who deserves your manipulation. This compartmentalization also protects you from becoming a monster. When manipulation becomes your default mode of interaction, when you start using these techniques on everyone regardless of whether they deserve it, when you lose the ability to form genuine connections with other people, you've crossed a line that's very difficult to uncross. You've sacrificed your humanity for power, and that's a trade that's rarely worth making. So as you move forward with this knowledge, as you begin to see the world through these new eyes, as you start to recognize the opportunities that surround you every day, remember to stay human. Remember that power is meaningless without relationships, that control is empty without connection, that winning is hollow without love. Use these skills to protect what matters to you, to build the life you want, to create security for yourself and those you care about. But don't let them become the only tools in your arsenal. The greatest practitioners of this art are not the ones who manipulate everyone they meet, but the ones who choose their targets carefully, who act with precision rather than broad destruction, who understand that true power lies not in controlling others, but in controlling yourself. They are the ones who can walk among wolves while maintaining their essential humanity, who can play the game without being consumed by it, who can wield these dark arts in service of something greater than mere domination. This is your challenge now, to take this knowledge and use it wisely, to understand that with great power comes not just great responsibility, but great temptation, to recognize that the line between necessary manipulation and unnecessary cruelty is thin but crucial, to remember that the ultimate victory is not the destruction of your enemies, but the construction of a life worth living. The choice is yours. The power is in your hands. What you build with it will determine not just your success, but your soul.